When I earned my master's, my family kept repeating, "We've got something big planned." My girlfriend smirked each time I asked. "You won't ever forget it," she told me. On commencement day, I stepped out to a vacant auditorium. Hours later, I opened Instagram, my family, my girlfriend, my friends, all at a lake house barbecue. The caption read, "Celebrating the real star." I shut my laptop without a word. 3 days later, a group chat notification appeared that had me laughing until my stomach hurt. Can you imagine pouring years of your life into something, sacrificing everything for a dream, only for your own family, your girlfriend, and your closest friends to not just miss your biggest day, but to be actively celebrating someone else? What the hell happened next, you ask? Well, this isn't just a story about being overlooked. It's about the coldest, most satisfying comeuppance I ever engineered. My name is Mark, I'm 26, and a few months ago, I walked across a stage that was supposed to represent years of brutal hard work, sleepless nights, and sacrifices that honestly still sting when I think about them. Getting my master's degree in my field wasn't just a piece of paper. It was the culmination of endless hours in the library, grinding side jobs to pay rent, and countless moments where I had to tell myself, just push a little longer. I truly believe that graduation ceremony would be my family's moment as much as mine. At least, that's what they kept telling me. "We've got something special planned," my mom would chirp, with that rehearsed smile she pulls out at every family dinner. My dad would nod along, like some grand surprise was genuinely in the works. And my girlfriend, Emily, she'd give me this sly little smirk every time I dared to ask what was going on. "You'll never forget it," she'd tease. And you know what? A part of me actually let my guard down. I thought, maybe for once, they're genuinely excited for me. Maybe this will be one of those milestones families look back on for years. That optimism, I know now, was foolish. See, my family has always had this subtle way of reminding me that I'm secondary. It wasn't outright rejection or obvious cruelty, but this constant, low hum of favoritism and dismissal that I just grew up with. My older brother, Andrew, he could do no wrong. If he forgot to show up to Thanksgiving, oh, Andrew's just so busy with work. But if I had to cancel plans to study, Mark's always so antisocial. Andrew needed money. Everyone rushed in with open wallets. I asked for help with textbooks. I got a lecture about independence. Anyone on the outside would probably miss it, but living in it, you feel it like a draft in a house. Always there, always chilling you to the bone. Emily knew this about me. Or at least, I thought she did. We talked about it before. She'd seen the way my parents' attention seemed to orbit Andrew's accomplishments like planets around the sun. She'd even told me once, "When it's your turn, Mark, you'll shine so bright they won't be able to ignore you." I believed her. God, I wanted to. Graduation morning, I woke up a bundle of nerves, but buzzing with excitement. Emily kissed me on the cheek, told me she'd meet me at the ceremony, and then disappeared hours earlier than I expected. "Getting ready for the big surprise," she chirped. I didn't think much of it. My parents had texted me too. "We're proud of you. See you later." More vague promises, no hint of what was coming. When the ceremony ended, I remember walking out of the auditorium, my cap still balanced on my head, diploma folder clutched in hand. I scanned the rows of chairs, then the crowd outside, searching for familiar faces. At first, I thought I just didn't see them, that maybe they were around the corner or running late. I lingered. My classmates were hugging their families, posing for photos, flowers and balloons everywhere. One of my professors clapped me on the back and said, "Congratulations, Mark. Where's the fan club?" I laughed nervously, muttering something about traffic. But the truth was, no one was there. Not my parents, not my brother, not Emily, not even my closest friends who'd promised to scream embarrassingly loud when my name got called. I walked out to an empty auditorium, the sound of cheers for other graduates ringing in my ears, while I stood there alone with my degree folder. It felt like a punch to the gut. I went home that evening, the silence gnawing at me. I told myself there had to be an explanation. A flat tire, a wrong time written down, something. But the longer I sat in my apartment, the heavier the air got. Hours later, I opened Instagram out of habit, and my stomach dropped. There they were. All of them. My family, my girlfriend, my friends. At a lake house barbecue. The caption under a group photo made my chest tighten, so hard I thought I might be sick. Celebrating the real star. And there was Andrew, grinning front and center, beer in hand, everyone else clinging to him like he'd just won a Nobel Prize. Emily had her arm draped over his shoulder, a smile wide across her face, like this was the moment she'd been waiting for all along. I just stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the like button out of some bizarre instinct, but I couldn't do it. Instead, I shut the laptop without a word and sat there in the dark. The anger didn't hit right away. At first, it was this hollow emptiness, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left nothing but air. Then it started to burn. A slow, crawling fire in my chest that made it hard to breathe. For 3 days, I didn't say anything. No texts, no calls, no confrontation. I didn't even answer when Emily tried to message me that first night. Just a quick, hope you're not mad. You'll understand soon. That made me want to laugh and scream at the same time. My parents didn't bother checking in. My friends, well, I guess I should stop calling them that. On the 3rd day, my phone buzzed. A group chat notification popped up, the same one we'd used for years to coordinate family holidays and birthday dinners. Against my better judgment, I opened it. And what I saw, it made me laugh, so hard my stomach hurt. It wasn't joy. It wasn't happiness. It was the kind of laughter that comes from disbelief, from realizing just how far people are willing to go when you're not their priority. And that's where things started to shift for me. When I tell you that group chat message was the strangest mix of absurd and infuriating, I mean it. My phone lit up mid-morning with that familiar ding, and I just stared at the screen for a second before deciding, against all logic, to open it. Part of me expected some flimsy apology, maybe an explanation so paper-thin I'd see right through it. But what I found instead was like fuel poured directly onto the fire that had been smoldering in me for 3 straight days. The message was from my mom, written in her trademark cheerful tone, the kind of fake brightness she always put on when she knew she was delivering something unfair. Hey, everyone. Great weekend at the lake house. Let's plan another soon to celebrate Andrew's big promotion. Mark, hope you didn't mind us combining the celebrations. It just made sense since everyone was already there for him. I had to read it 3 times to be sure I wasn't hallucinating. Combining the celebrations? That was her excuse. As if my graduation, something I had poured years of my life into, was just some add-on event tacked onto the edge of Andrew's never-ending spotlight. And then, as if that wasn't enough to twist the knife, my brother chimed in almost immediately. Yeah, man. No hard feelings. It was just better timing. Everyone wanted to be there for me, since it's a career thing. You know, your graduation is cool and all, but it's not really the same. You get it. Cool and all. That's what my degree was worth in their eyes. I sat there, reading those words over and over, my jaw tightening with each pass. Emily finally spoke up in the chat, too. We thought it would be fun to surprise you later, instead of doing the whole ceremony thing. The lake house was such a good vibe, and everyone was already in party mode. We didn't want you to feel left out, though. Not feel left out. The irony of that line almost made me choke. They literally left me standing alone outside my own graduation ceremony like some abandoned extra in a movie scene while they threw a party without me. And now they were trying to spin it as though this was for my benefit, as though the thought of me had even crossed their minds. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The anger was so sharp, I was afraid if I typed anything it would come out as incoherent rage. So I put the phone down, paced my apartment, and let that fire grow. The following days only added kindling. Emily came over 2 nights later, acting like nothing was wrong. She walked in, kissed me on the cheek, and said, "So you're not mad, right?" Like, she borrowed my hoodie without asking, not ditched me on the most important day of my life. I asked her point blank why she thought it was okay. She shrugged, like this was all common sense. "Babe, you know how your family is. Andrew's promotion was huge. If we split it, people would have had to choose. And honestly, most of them would have picked his thing anyway. It just made sense to keep everyone together. You wouldn't have wanted an empty ceremony, right?" That line, "You wouldn't have wanted an empty ceremony," it echoed in my head for hours after she left. She said it so casually, not even realizing she'd admitted the truth. They didn't think my accomplishment was enough to warrant attention on its own. They knew people wouldn't show up for me. So, instead of pushing back, Instead of standing by me, they went with a safe bet. Andrew. My parents doubled down, too. The next Sunday, I got a call from my dad. His voice carried that same blend of authority and dismissal he'd used my whole life. Son, don't take this personally. It's not a competition. Andrew's work promotion is just a bigger milestone in the grand scheme of things. Your degree is great, but it's just school. There'll be other graduations. Careers, though, those really matter. I remember gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream at him, to ask him if he even understood what it took to get to that stage. The hours of research, the papers, the rejections, the revisions, the sheer exhaustion. But I didn't. I just let him ramble about how proud they were of both of us, though clearly one of us a little more than the other. Even my so-called friends got in on the act. One messaged me privately after the lake house photos had been posted. Hey man, sorry we didn't make it to the ceremony. We figured we'd see you at the party anyway. Didn't realize you weren't coming. You should have said something. Said something? Said what? That I'd assumed my own graduation celebration might actually include me? It was like I'd fallen into some bizarre alternate reality where everyone else's logic made perfect sense to them, but left me questioning my own sanity. The worst part wasn't even the dismissal. It was the way they acted like I was being unreasonable for being upset. Emily started pulling away, saying things like, "You're overreacting. You're making a big deal out of nothing." Whenever I tried to talk about it, my mom sent me a long text about how family harmony depends on forgiveness and how I needed to be the bigger person. Andrew, of course, played the role of magnanimous sibling, sending me a casual, "Hope we're cool. Bro didn't mean to step on your moment." Step on my moment? He didn't just step on it. He crushed it, stomped it into the ground, and then threw a party on the remains. It became impossible to ignore the pattern. This wasn't just about graduation. It was the latest in a lifetime of moments where my needs, my achievements, my milestones were treated like optional side quests in the grand narrative of Andrew's life. When he got his driver's license, he got a car. When I got mine, I got handed a lecture about responsibility. When he barely passed a class, it was, he tried his best. When I aced mine, it was, don't get cocky. Every single time, the scales tilted in his favor, and I was expected to smile and clap along. And now they had taken the one moment I'd been holding on to for years, the one thing I thought couldn't be overshadowed, and reduced it to a footnote at a barbecue. I started pulling away, little by little. I stopped answering texts right away, stopped picking up calls unless I absolutely had to. When Emily pressed me, I told her I needed space. She rolled her eyes and muttered something about how I was so dramatic lately. That was when it really hit me. She wasn't just complicit. She was part of it. She'd chosen to stand with them, not me. The more distance I put between us, the clearer everything became. Their favoritism wasn't an accident. It wasn't thoughtlessness. It was a choice, one they'd made again and again until I was conditioned to expect less, to accept scraps, to swallow disappointment with a polite smile. But here's the thing. Something in me snapped after that group chat. The fire that had been burning slowly since graduation wasn't just anger anymore. It was resolve. I realized that if I didn't change the script, they would keep writing me as the background character in my own life. And it was around then that I started noticing cracks in their story, small things they didn't think I'd catch, bits of information that hinted their perfect little narrative wasn't as airtight as they wanted it to seem. That group chat message, that was the spark. What came next was me deciding I wasn't going to just sit back and swallow it anymore. The day everything truly broke was one of those moments you can feel in your bones even before it fully unfolds. You know, when there's tension in the air and everyone else pretends it's normal, but you're the only one who can see the storm clouds gathering. That's how it felt. I'd already been carrying the weight of the graduation fiasco, the betrayal, the way they all acted like I was crazy for being upset, and I'd been trying to keep myself distant. But then came the next hit, the kind that didn't just sting. It left me hollow. It started with another message in the family group chat about 2 weeks after graduation. My mom posted, "Everyone save the date. We're hosting a big dinner at the country club to celebrate Andrew's promotion officially. This is going to be our biggest event yet." I stared at it for a long time, waiting for my name to appear somewhere in that message. "I will also toast to Mark's graduation, maybe? Something." But no, it was all about Andrew, the real star, as their Instagram caption had so cruelly put it. I ignored the message at first. I told myself I wasn't going. I had zero interest in sitting through yet another night of everyone fawning over Andrew like he'd cured a disease. But then Emily called me. She sounded chipper, almost rehearsed, like she'd practiced what she was about to say. "Hey, babe," she started. "So about the dinner? I think you should come." "I don't want to go," I said flatly. "You have to," she insisted. "It'll look weird if you don't. Besides, your parents said they've got a surprise planned this time, and they really want you there." The word surprise made my stomach clench. I'd heard that line before, and the last time it ended with me standing alone at my own graduation. But she kept pushing. "Just trust me, okay? Things will be different this time." Against my better judgment, I agreed. Maybe a part of me wanted to test the waters, to see if there was even a shred of sincerity left in them. The night of the dinner, I pulled into the country club parking lot, already feeling like an outsider. Everyone else's cars were parked up front, but I ended up circling twice before I found a spot in the back. It was little details like that that always seemed to follow me. Never in the spotlight, always on the margins. When I walked inside, I was greeted by the usual chorus of polite smiles and half-hearted congratulations. "Hey, Mark. Good to see you. Congrats again on school, right?" The word school dripped from their mouths like it was a hobby, not years of grueling effort. Emily was already there, sitting with Andrew and my parents. She waved me over, but something about her smile fell off. Forced, too wide. I joined them at the table, and almost immediately Andrew leaned back in his chair with that smug grin I knew too well. "So, Mark," he said, swirling his wine glass, "I hear you've been a little sensitive about the graduation thing." I froze. The table went quiet for a second, and then my mom jumped in, her voice saccharine. "Honey, don't take it the wrong way. We just thought Andrew's career milestone deserved the bigger spotlight. You'll have plenty of other graduations if you keep going with school." I wanted to walk out right then, but before I could, the server started bringing out plates, and the dinner shifted into its next act. My dad stood up, clinking his glass for attention. "I want to make a toast," he announced, smiling broadly. I braced myself. "To Andrew," he said proudly, "for showing us what true hard work looks like, for climbing the ladder and making us all proud." The room erupted in applause. I sat there, silent, gripping my fork so tightly I thought it might snap. And then, as the applause died down, my mom added casually, "Oh, and let's not forget Mark, who also graduated recently. Great job, sweetheart." It was like someone patting a child on the head for finishing a puzzle. A dismissive afterthought. I swallowed the bitterness and tried to hold it together. But the real betrayal hadn't even landed yet. That came later in the evening, when my parents stood up again, smiling like hosts on a game show. "We have a big announcement," my mom said, her eyes sparkling. "We wanted to surprise Andrew tonight with something special to honor his achievements." The servers reappeared, carrying a large envelope on a silver tray. Andrew opened it, and I watched his grin stretch wider as he read aloud. "A down payment on a condo." "Are you serious?" The room broke into cheers again. My parents clapped, tears in their eyes. "You've earned it," my dad said. "You deserve to start your next chapter in style." I sat frozen, the air sucked out of my lungs. A condo. They had given him a literal down payment for a condo. Meanwhile, I had worked 2 part-time jobs just to afford rent during grad school. I'd eaten instant noodles for weeks at a time, so I could afford textbooks. And when I'd asked for even a fraction of help, I'd been told to tough it out. That struggle builds character. Andrew turned to me, then, smirking as he slid the envelope back into its case. "Guess being the golden child has its perks, huh?" The table laughed. Even Emily. That was the moment it hit me, like a physical blow. She laughed. The same woman who had kissed me the night before my graduation, promising that my day would be unforgettable. She laughed right along with them, as if all of this was one big joke at my expense. Something inside me cracked. I excused myself from the table, claiming I needed air. I stumbled out onto the patio, gripping the railing as if it was the only thing holding me upright. My chest felt tight. My hands were shaking. I thought about every sacrifice I'd made, every time I'd swallowed my pride. Every time I told myself, maybe next time they'll see me. And for what? To watch them hand my brother a condo while I was treated like a child with a participation ribbon. Emily came out a few minutes later. "Mark, don't be like this," she said softly, reaching for my arm. I pulled away. "You knew about this, didn't you?" She hesitated, just long enough for the silence to confirm it. "They told me not to say anything," she admitted. "I didn't want to ruin the surprise." I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "Surprise? For who, Emily? For me or for him?" Her face tightened. And for once, she didn't have a quick excuse. She just looked at me, eyes darting, like maybe she was finally realizing what this all meant. That was the emotional breaking point for me. In that moment, standing outside that country club while my family toasted Andrew with champagne, and my girlfriend admitted she'd been in on it all along, I knew things could never go back to how they were. Something fundamental had shattered. I didn't go back inside. I left, got in my car, and drove away without a word. My phone buzzed all night with messages from my mom, from Andrew, from Emily. All variations of "don't be dramatic. You should be happy for him. Family is about support." But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for walking away. I just felt empty. And beneath that emptiness, a quiet resolve began to grow. Because if this was how they wanted to play the game, then I wasn't going to sit quietly on the sidelines anymore. And that's where things began to shift, where the seeds of something much bigger, much sharper, started to take root. I didn't sleep the night of the country club dinner. I drove home on autopilot, headlights cutting through the dark, my mind running in loops that wouldn't quiet down. The images kept replaying. My parents beaming as I handed Andrew a literal down payment for a condo, my mom's perfunctory "great job, sweetheart," tossed in like a bone to a begging dog, and Emily's laugh, that sharp, echoing sound that felt like a betrayal all its own. By the time I reached my apartment, I was shaking so badly I could barely fit the key into the lock. Inside, I dropped onto the couch without turning on the lights. The silence pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. My diploma sat on the shelf across the room, the one thing I thought would finally mean something. Instead, it felt like a joke. I stared at it until my eyes blurred, thinking about all the nights I'd stayed up with coffee at 2 a.m. The mornings I dragged myself to class after closing a late shift at the bookstore. The friendships I'd put on hold. The birthday parties I'd missed. All because I believed the payoff would be worth it. That one day they'd look at me and say, "We're proud of you." But they didn't. They never would. The next week felt like walking through molasses. I went to work. I came home. I ate whatever scraps were in the fridge. My phone buzzed constantly. Calls, texts, voicemails, all variations of the same tune. "Don't hold a grudge. You're being unreasonable. Andrew deserves this. Stop being jealous." I stopped answering altogether. I left messages unread. Let calls go to voicemail. Even Emily, especially Emily, she tried harder than the rest. She showed up at my apartment twice, knocking on the door until my neighbors peeked out into the hallway. Both times, I stayed quiet, sitting on the floor with my back pressed against the door, listening to her voice filter through the wood. "Mark, please, you're overthinking this. It wasn't about you. It was just easier this way. We can make it up to you. We'll plan something small, just us. Isn't that enough?" Her words landed like pebbles thrown at a brick wall. Small. Just us. As if what had been taken from me could be patched together with a pity dinner for two. After the second time she left, I sat on the floor until my legs went numb. My apartment was so quiet that the hum of the refrigerator felt deafening. That was the first time in years I thought about leaving. Not just the apartment, but everything. My job, the city, the relationships that had rotted from the inside out. The idea of disappearing somewhere far away, where no one knew my family's names, felt intoxicating. But reality had claws. Rent was due, bills were stacking, and the student loans that had been lurking in the shadows were starting to send their first polite but firm reminders. I couldn't run. Not yet. The following weekend, I tried something I hadn't done in years. I visited the lake. Not the same lake house they had flaunted on Instagram, but the smaller public dock a few miles down. The place I used to go as a teenager when the noise at home got too loud. I sat there on the wooden planks, my feet dangling above the water, the air damp and cool. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to calm. The water didn't care about Andrew's promotion. The trees didn't laugh when my mom brushed me aside. Out there, it was just me and the silence. I thought about the word family a lot that day. How it was supposed to mean support, love, loyalty. For me, it had always meant comparison, sacrifice, and disappointment. I thought about every holiday where Andrew's mistakes were excused and my accomplishments minimized. I thought about Emily's smirk when she told me I'd never forget my graduation surprise, and how right she was, though not in the way she intended. That night, back in my apartment, I made a list. I didn't know why I started writing, but once I did, the pen didn't stop. At the top I wrote, what I want. Underneath, the words spilled out, respect, independence, a future that isn't tied to them. To stop apologizing for existing. Then I flipped the page and wrote, what they've taken. This list was longer. My graduation, my peace of mind, my dignity, my trust. I stared at those 2 pages for a long time. And for the first time since the dinner, I felt something shift. The ache was still there. The hollow grief of realizing I'd never be the son they wanted, never the partner Emily pretended to love. But underneath it, something new was taking shape, something sharper. It was around then that the calls started slowing down. My family must have convinced themselves I'd gotten over it, because that's what I always did before. Disappear for a while, lick my wounds, then crawl back with a polite smile and a willingness to pretend nothing happened. They thought this would be no different, but this time was different. I started pulling back from everything tied to them. I changed the settings on my phone, so group chat notifications no longer appeared. I stopped checking their social media, stopped looking for scraps of acknowledgement in their curated posts. Emily's texts became background noise, piling up unanswered until even she began to taper off. The loneliness was brutal, I won't lie. There were nights I sat at the kitchen table staring at the wall, wondering if maybe I was making it worse by cutting myself off, wondering if maybe they were right. Maybe I was being dramatic. But then I'd remember Andrew's grin as he held that envelope, or my dad's words, careers matter. School doesn't. And the doubt hardened back into anger. Rock bottom wasn't one single moment. It was a series of them. It was the day I realized I hadn't laughed in weeks. The night I ate a bowl of cereal for dinner because cooking felt pointless. The morning I woke up and saw the sun shining and felt absolutely nothing. It was being hollowed out by betrayal and silence at the same time. But rock bottom also has a strange way of clarifying things. When you've been stripped of every illusion, when the people who are supposed to love you show you again and again that they won't, you start to see the world with sharper eyes. I started thinking less about what I had lost and more about what I still had and what I could build. The degree on the shelf was still mine, even if they mocked it. The late nights and sacrifices were still part of me, even if they pretended not to notice. And if they weren't going to give me respect, then maybe I'd have to take it in a different way. That seed of an idea scared me at first. I wasn't used to thinking about myself as someone who fought back. 4 years, I'd been the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over, the one who swallowed pain so the family could keep pretending everything was fine. But sitting there in my dim apartment, surrounded by silence and lists of what I wanted versus what they'd taken, I realized I couldn't keep playing that role. Because if I did, nothing would ever change. That's where I stayed for a while, low, quiet, invisible to them. They thought I was sulking. They thought I'd crawl back eventually. But what I was really doing was gathering myself, piecing together the parts of me they hadn't. Worked in corporate development. Not glamorous, but the kind of job where you peek behind the curtains of business promises and see the gears. And those gears, they turn on paperwork, timing, and leverage. I kept a low profile at first. You learn fast in an office that attention is currency. Throw it around carelessly, and people notice for the wrong reasons. So I shelved the theatrics and began collecting information like someone curating a museum. Careful, cataloged, and private. I read every contract that crossed my desk with a kind of personal hunger I'd never felt in school. Where my brother's life had been awarded a down payment like a trophy, mine was becoming a ledger of small, incremental victories. There was a stealthy pleasure in it. The more I learned about how deals were structured, how ownership could be held under shells and LLCs, how developers timed closings to coincide with tax benefits, the more the world looked like a game of edges and entries rather than destiny and favorites. Outside work, I built quiet redundancies. I opened a separate bank account, met with a financial advisor, The kind you don't tell family about because they'd only explain the right way to do things. I asked for help and started paying myself differently, not extravagantly, but with intention. A friend from my photography class, Jenna, who shot weddings and rarely worked weekends, mentioned in passing that she did some freelance event coordination on the side. I wrote her a note and asked if she'd grab coffee. 6 months later, she was more than a friend. She was an occasional partner in logistics and someone who could, with the right pitch, prod vendors into sharing nondescript details about events, dates, and payments. Not illegal things, just the kind of information most people ignore because they're busy being performative at family dinners. Parallel to that, I quietly educated myself. Nights that used to be hollow and long turned into sessions with books about real estate law, corporate structures, and the little-known protections people put between themselves and responsibility. I took an online course in contract negotiation and read blogs full of real-life case studies where people's assumed security, a condo, a trust, a job, unraveled because of one overlooked clause. The knowledge felt like armor. It changed the way I walked into rooms where I'd felt powerless before. I now had context and vocabulary. I could read a deed and understand the implications. I began to wonder how carefully my parents and Andrew had made this look like destiny when it might have been something far more fragile. Then something else happened that felt like fate wearing sensible shoes. A vendor dispute landed on my desk involving one of the small construction firms that had handled renovations in our neighborhood. Their paperwork was messy, and someone in my department was complaining about how they'd lost an invoice. I dug in because I'm annoying that way now. I like answers. The invoices were shuffled, signatures blurred, and one of the files mentioned a client account with the name of a holding company I'd never heard of. I ran the name, and to my surprise, it tied back in a very circumspect way to a property development firm that had worked with private clients in our county. One of those clients had a condo on the same block Andrew's family had just posted about. Coincidence? Maybe, but months of being ignored had put me in a place where I didn't accept coincidence as an endpoint. I kept following threads. Jenna helped with a contact she had at the club. He mentioned offhand that the developers sometimes left closing paperwork pending so they could finalize allocations after a promotional event. The phrase was opaque. It smelled like maneuvering. My stomach tightened. If there was wiggle room in how ownership and payment were recorded, if a down payment had been made in a way that relied on timing, rebates, or family guarantees, there might be leverage. Leverage wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about changing a system that made my family's favoritism feel like an immovable mountain. Leverage was about making them see the consequences of decisions they've been handing out like confetti. At work, I had started overseeing vendor due diligence for a small project. It was enough of a role to justify calling a few industry contacts and asking for background. I learned how developers shuffle titles through LLCs to limit liability and how gifts, like a down payment, are sometimes structured as loans or advances for tax reasons. More importantly, I met people who handled title insurance and mortgage oversight. You can't imagine how many doors open when bureaucracy trusts you with a badge in a meeting room. Not because I was clawing, but because I'd earned a seat at a table where processes are explained in concrete terms rather than family stories. As I stitched these pieces together, I also built a small but powerful network. There was Mia, an accountant who once did a favor for a colleague and knew the red flags when family finances were masked as corporate expenses. There was Tom, a loan officer who liked straight talk and would, for a price, show me how a financing agreement looked when it depended on parental guarantees. None of them were interested in drama. They were interested in the truth behind the numbers. And truth, let me tell you, is the enemy of comfortable lies. One night, poring over copies I'd quietly secured, public records, vendor lists, the occasional contract clause, I realized something important. The condo's down payment was a paper trail of goodwill more than a bulletproof gift. It had contingencies. It relied on developers clearing certain liens or on a timeline that, if interrupted, could cause the gift to become a mess. It was the sort of thing families used to perform generosity without actually parting with long-term control. My parents had the best of both worlds. All the show, none of the risk. Or so it seemed. And that's the exact psychological pivot I needed. If their generosity was performative, then exposing the machinery behind it, not to ruin anyone, but to reveal the narrative, would humiliate them in the only language they respected, public credibility. I didn't want to ruin lives. I wanted them to feel the small, precise discomfort of being unmasked. For years, they'd shaped reality with appearances, brunches, toasts, Instagram posts. I intended to use their own tools against them. Documentation, timelines, and a careful release of information that would force questions. Questions lead to explanations. Explanations lead to reality. And reality is stubborn. It doesn't accommodate curated narratives easily. By this point, I'd sharpened certain parts of my plan. First, I needed absolute clarity, dates, signatures, the name of the entity that technically held the down payment. Second, I needed someone on the inside who would corroborate what documents suggested, a notary who remembered an odd clause, a loan officer who could explain a conditional payment. Third, I needed patience. The last thing I wanted was a messy leak that would let them smear me as bitter and attention-seeking. This had to be airtight, methodical, and above all, legally clean. I was not out to break the law. I was out to expose a carefully curated lie. What surprised me most during this phase was not the sleight of hand I uncovered, but how much I enjoyed the work. There is a certain beauty in systems, deadlines, clauses, the rhythm of contracts being executed. For someone who'd spent years trying to earn validation from people who refused to see him, being able to read a legal document and know exactly what it meant felt like a small, precise victory. It was quiet. It was mine. And then 2 months into my collection of documents and phone calls, I found the hinge. It was a single line in a file I'd pulled from a county clerk's public records portal, a minor addendum to a purchase agreement signed in a scrawl I recognized only because I'd seen it in other family-related filings. The addendum included a clause that effectively postponed final transfer of title until all promotional obligations were satisfied and explicitly referenced an allocation payment to be formalized upon event completion. Translation: the down payment had been documented in a way that allowed the developer to delay recording full ownership until certain conditions were met, conditions the family controlled via their social standing and the club's events calendar. In plain English, the gift was performative, contingent, and reversible under certain technical circumstances. In other, even plainer words, their show of generosity could be interrupted by the kind of legal question no one expected to be asked. The condo was not a monument. It was a paper construct waiting for a wrench. My heart thumped in a way that had nothing to do with panic and everything to do with the adrenaline of possibility. This was not a slam dunk, and it wasn't an immediate victory. It was, however, a hinge. A place where pressure could be applied and leverage extracted. The realization settled over me like cool water. Everything I had been building, the job, the network, the quiet study, the patient cataloging of details, had led to this small, amazing, dangerous little sentence. I closed the file, took a breath, and for the first time in months, smiled without the taste of acid at the back of my throat. I was no longer simply angry. I was prepared. I was methodical. I had a plan that didn't require theatrics, just time, documentation, and the willingness to let truth do most of the work. There were still risks. There were things I didn't yet know, the developer's tolerance for public scrutiny, whether the clause could be defended in court, how my parents would react if the curtain was pulled back. But for the first time, the path forward had clarity. I could see the pieces I needed and the order in which to place them. That night, I called Jenna and asked if she could meet me in the morning. I drafted a message to Mia and Tom, careful and clinical, asking for their input on a paper trail and whether certain clauses could be challenged without firing off a legal war. I made a list of names, dates, and questions. And then I put the file back in its folder like someone setting a loaded tool on a workbench, ready for measured use. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt cold, precise, and oddly calm. The anger that had once burned hot was now a steady engine. I'd built a quiet infrastructure of competence, and now that infrastructure had unearthed a vulnerability. What I didn't know, and what I was about to find out, was whether I would use that vulnerability to demand real change or to take something back in a way that would burn bridges beyond repair. Either way, the moment of decision was close. The first move required patience, the second required nerve, and the third would be irreversible. The moment I decided to act, everything I'd done until then felt like assembling a clock. Careful gears, measured clicks, no dramatic flourish, only precise movement. I didn't want a scene. I wanted an effect so clean it would leave them scrambling to explain themselves while I sat back and watched the veneer peel. Revenge, to me then, wasn't about spectacle. It was about truth doing the work. If they built their status on curated appearances, I'd give them a very public audit. I began with timing. I knew when the condo closing was scheduled, a few weeks out, based on a note I'd found in a vendor file and a casual mention someone at the club had let slip. That window was everything. Close enough that any delay would be visible and painful, but far enough that I could move strategically. I marked the date and structured the plan backward from there. Step 1. Formalize what I already had. I compiled a tidy dossier, the county addendum with the promotional obligations clause highlighted, copies of the Instagram posts and photos showing the timeline, the vendor correspondence that hinted at allocation payments, and printouts of the public records tying the holding company name back to the condo project. I included annotated notes, dates, sources, and a plain English summary at the front. I wasn't trying to be clever. I wanted the facts to sit on someone's desk and speak plainly without emotion. Step 2. Assemble credible intermediaries. This wasn't something I wanted to be seen doing alone. If I sent a rattling message signed Mark, bitter sibling, they'd call me dramatic and the whole thing would be dismissed. But the same facts, packaged by a title company, an accountant, and a loan officer had muscle. So I reached out quietly to Mia, Tom, and Jenna. Each of them had already seen snippets of what I was working with, and each agreed to help. Not because they wanted to ruin a family, but because the legal structure I'd uncovered was sloppy and deserved scrutiny. Mia, the accountant, ran the numbers and called back with a calm voice I'd come to trust. "There's enough here to ask questions," she said. "Contingent clauses are not inherently illegal, but if the developer or the family misrepresented the terms to the lender or to title insurance, that's a problem." Tom, the loan officer, confirmed that lenders sometimes rely on documentation being recorded in a certain way before advancing funds, and if the recording was conditional, the bank could refuse to finalize financing until clarity was provided. Jenna agreed that the club's vendor contact could corroborate the odd timing language in earlier emails. They weren't playing along with my anger. They were helping me test a bureaucratic lever. That distinction mattered. This had to be about procedure, not melodrama. Step 3. Formal inquiries. I drafted 2 letters that felt clinical and cold in their precision. One was addressed to the title company handling the condo's closing, the second to the developer's legal counsel. Both letters laid out the clause I'd found, requested clarification about the conditions for final transfer, and asked whether any liens, pending allocations, or undisclosed contingencies existed that could affect clear title. The letters were courteous but firm, the kind of correspondence that, if ignored, becomes evidence itself. I did not copy the family. I wasn't interested in grandstanding in the family group chat. Instead, I copied parties who could realistically hit pause if something was off: the title company, the lender's compliance officer, via Tom, the county clerk's office that maintained records, and the bank's title insurance underwriter. I also, as a courtesy and tactical move, sent a brief heads-up to the club's general manager, not accusatory, just a note. You may want to be aware that certain documents affecting a recent down payment contain conditional language. We've requested clarification. Thought you should know in case this affects upcoming events. That line was deliberate. If the club valued its reputation, they'd pay attention. I'm not ashamed to admit I felt a sick, electric thrill when I hit send. It was a grown-up, strangely satisfying version of calling out a cheat on a test. The bureaucracy that had made my parents' performative generosity possible now had the potential to do the exposing. Then came the waiting, the boring, necessary kind that most people confuse with cowardice. I call it patience. Patience gives institutions time to do what they do: respond, audit, and if needed, freeze. Responses were not immediate, but they were faster than I'd expected. The title company wrote back in 2 business days with a formal acknowledgement and a request for an appointment to review the chain of title. Tom's compliance contact answered with the bluntness only compliance teams have. "We will place a courtesy hold on funding pending verification of recorded documents." Translation: The lender wouldn't wire the money until they were sure title could be delivered clean. The developer's counsel asked for an extension and a meeting with a local notary who'd been present at the addendum signing. Jenna's club contact responded that they'd received my note and would be reviewing internal records. Those words, hold, pending, verification, were small administrative things, but they translated into immediate practical delay. A down payment that had seemed to convert into ownership could now hang in limbo, subject to a check that would inevitably drag family attention to the courthouse rather than the Instagram feed. I knew what a pause like this would do emotionally. It would force the family to shift from celebration to explanation, and explanations are where curated narratives tend to unravel. Still, I didn't want to create a feeding frenzy. I wanted the process to be surgical. So, I continued quietly, making phone calls only when necessary, confirming meetings, and ensuring every request I made was backed by protocol. I had learned that the law and administrative processes are stubbornly neutral. They respond to documentation, not to feelings. If I wanted consequence, I needed to stay procedural. 2 weeks before the scheduled closing, the developer's counsel asked to meet in person. That request was both an opportunity and a risk. I negotiated the meeting through Mia and a small legal aid. Nothing dramatic on my side. I wanted the developer to present answers in a setting where someone who knew accounting could interpret nuances and call them out if needed. The meeting was scheduled for a neutral location, the county clerk's public room, during regular business hours. Neutral ground reduces theatrics and increases clarity. It was exactly the kind of pressure I wanted. On the morning of the meeting, my hands felt steady. I took the dossier, made one last copy for the clerk's file, and arrived early. The developer team showed up with counsel in a sensible suit, a stack of documents, and an expression I interpreted as annoyance more than fear. They explained the clause as they always had, standard promotional language, conditional allocations, timing to accommodate events. Their words were polite, practiced, and protective. Mia was patient. She asked for specifics, the exact dates payments were recorded, whether any escrow accounts held the funds, and whether the lender's conditions for advance had all been met. The developer's counsel sidestepped a bit, offering a partial explanation about administrative timing and promising full documentation by the end of the week. At that point, the clerk noted the request and reminded everyone that until the title was recorded and funds were advanced, no transfer was final in the eyes of the county. I felt the moment tighten, like the final turn of a key. The developers promised to clarify by week's end was thin currency. The lender's hold remained in place. My family, who'd expected a seamless victory lap, was about to be asked for proof of what they'd been presenting as generosity. Before the meeting broke up, the clerk asked a question that landed differently than all the rest. Is there any party here who disputes the timing or reality of the payment? His eye flicked to me, casual and procedural. I could have stayed silent. I could have let them save face. But silence had been my family's weapon for years, their omission and passing over. I'd learned that not speaking up lets narratives calcify. I'm not disputing the gift, I said, my voice level. I'm requesting clarity because I represent an interested party who wants assurance that the documentation reflects what's been represented. The words were small, a kind of bureaucratic truth-telling. The clerk nodded, made a note, and added that given the questions on record, the county would set a small administrative review to confirm the chain of title before recording. On my drive home, I felt hollow and electric. The strategy had worked in the way it was supposed to. Leverage applied. Pause initiated. Scrutiny engaged. I didn't gloat. That wasn't the point. The point was that their narrative had been forced into a place where facts mattered more than appearances. The countdown then became a series of administrative rhythms. Requests for documents, a recorded phone call with the developer's paralegal, a faxed ledger from an escrow account, and the lender's stern note that funding would not proceed until complete verification. I checked my inbox in a way I hadn't checked it in months, not for affection or approval, but to measure procedural momentum. Each time I saw a new response, I felt my hand steady a little more. And then the final stroke I'd planned for, a succinct, tightly worded email to the family, sent through a process server only as a last resort, I never actually had to use. Instead, the title company's compliance officer made a short call the evening before the planned move-in. Due to pending verification, We are unable to record the deed tomorrow. We will notify all parties as soon as we have clearance. That sentence, neutral, administrative, utterly ordinary, was the fulcrum. It did not accuse anyone of wrongdoing. It did not demand punishment. It simply announced a factual barrier. The transfer could not proceed as promised until the record was clear. For my parents and Andrew, the announcement would be deflating. For me, it was a precise legal ripple that would force them to answer uncomfortable questions. I didn't watch their faces when the hold became official. I didn't need to. I had engineered a situation where their performative generosity could no longer be assumed without backup documentation. I had leveraged the machinery of contracts and compliance to create a pause that would make the family's story fragile. I'd used their own tools, the county records they prized, the club they loved for image, the title company they trusted, to introduce scrutiny. That was where the first act of revenge landed. Not in a shouting match or a viral post, but in the sterile language of institutions that don't care about family portraits. The condo's transfer was delayed. The down payment was no longer a neat Instagram caption. It had become a question on a clerk's desk. Their celebration was interrupted by a process, and processes, as I'd learned, often demand answers. There was one move left I hadn't executed yet. A step I'd save for when the family's panic would be most visible. A carefully timed release of certain documents to the one place my parents would feel pressure most acutely, the club's board and their social circle. I could pull that lever, but pulling it would change everything in a way I couldn't unmake. It would force not just questions, but public explanation. That choice felt like standing at the edge of a stage with a microphone in my hand. The crowd was gathered. The mechanism beneath them had been exposed, and the first administrative consequences had begun. The rest, the part where faces flush, excuses tumble, and reputations wobble, was coming, but I hadn't decided how loudly to strike. Fallout has a way of rolling in quietly before anyone realizes the storm has already hit. The first cracks didn't come from me sending anything directly to my family. They came from the institutions that my parents trusted more than their own blood. When the title company officially delayed recording the condo transfer, the phone calls began. My parents called the developer. The developer called the bank. The bank pointed back to pending verification. And suddenly, the triumphant gift they'd used to crown Andrew's promotion wasn't a reality. It was a question mark hanging in the county clerk's office. I didn't hear this from them, of course. They weren't about to admit the facade was crumbling. I heard it from Jenna, whose contact at the club said my parents had shown up to a board luncheon looking pale and distracted, whispering into their phones instead of holding court. Andrew apparently was furious. He'd already moved some of his things into the condo, invited friends over to show it off, even posted a smug Instagram story with the caption, "New digs, new era." The comments were full of congratulations. The next day, the story disappeared. Then came the message I'd been waiting for. A group chat ping from my mom. "There seems to be some confusion with the condo paperwork. We're sorting it out. No need for anyone to panic." She tried to sound casual, but her tone had cracks in it. A half hour later, Andrew followed with, "Mark, did you say something to someone? Because this is feeling suspicious." I didn't answer. Silence. After years of being silenced, it had become my weapon. The escalation came when the club's board sent out a short notice to members. Due to an inquiry into recent transactions involving promotional allocations, we will be conducting an internal review of event-related financial arrangements. The email wasn't dramatic, but it spread like wildfire through their social circle. Questions started bubbling. What inquiry? Which allocations? Who was involved? My parents prided themselves on their spotless reputation in that circle. And now their generosity was being spoken of in hushed, skeptical tones over martinis. The calls to me started then. At first polite. "Mark, honey, we'd like to talk. There seems to be some misunderstanding." Then sharper. "Mark, you're damaging the family name. This is petty." And finally desperate. "Please, for Andrew's sake, don't make this worse." But it wasn't me making it worse. It was their own choices laid bare under the light of documentation. The condo transfer was officially frozen until the county completed its review. The bank issued a notice of extension fees, charges that would come out of my parents' pockets. The developer, nervous about scrutiny, began distancing themselves, hinting they might walk away if questions weren't resolved. The meltdown came at a dinner weeks later, one I didn't attend, but heard about from Jenna's friend. My father apparently snapped when someone at the club casually asked how Andrew was liking that place. He almost got into a shouting match. My mom tried to smile it off, but Andrew, red-faced, slammed his glass down and hissed, "We were humiliated. Humiliated." By then, the documents I'd prepared had found their way. Not directly from me, but through channels I knew would circulate them. A board member had copies. A vendor whispered details. The truth didn't need me to shout. It needed me only to nudge. And the machinery of gossip and bureaucracy did the rest. Emily reached out once more weeks into the fallout. A single message. "I didn't realize you were capable of this." I read it twice, then deleted it. She was right, though. I hadn't realized either. The final blow wasn't loud. It was an email from the title company to all parties. Given unresolved discrepancies, we are unable to proceed with transfer of ownership under the current terms. Funds will be returned to the originating account pending renegotiation. In other words, no condo, no celebration, no gift to parade. The crown jewel had turned to dust. And that was the fallout. My parents forced to explain to their peers why their grand gesture had dissolved. Andrew, humiliated after bragging about a condo that never materialized. Their narrative, the one where they were the magnanimous benefactors, the family who rewarded success, shattered by the simple, boring truth of paperwork. As for me, I didn't gloat. I didn't send a single "told you so." I just kept living. Promotion after promotion, paycheck after paycheck, building a life that was mine alone. They tried to call, tried to salvage a relationship on their terms, but I gave them nothing. No fuel, no forgiveness, no audience. The last line of his chapter came not from me, but from the same group chat where this all began. Weeks after the fallout, Andrew sent one final message. "Mark, I hope you're happy." I looked at it for a long time, then finally typed a reply. Short, simple, undeniable. "I'm not happy. I'm free." And with that, I left the chat for good. What do you think? Was I right to pull the lever, or did I take it too far? Have you ever had to choose between your peace and your family's expectations? Let me know in the comments below. I really want to hear your thoughts.